Welcome to this session, how GitHub Next took Copilot Workspace from concept to code. So if this is not the talk you're expecting, now's your time that you can, I'm just kidding. We've got a great session here for you all. It's gonna be action-packed. We've got plenty of demos, plenty of stories. So we're gonna waste no time and introduce ourselves. So I'm Chris Reddington, I'm from our developer relations team, and day to day, I get to work with many of you in the developer community, understanding how you're using GitHub today, and frankly, how we can keep improving it and making that developer experience better. And I'm so excited because I get to work with folks like Cole from the GitHub Next team and tell the stories of how we're doing things at GitHub. And I'll hand over to Cole to share a bit more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cole. As Chris said, I'm on the GitHub Next team. And for the last year or so, I've been the lead designer and front-end engineer working on Copilot Workspace, which we will talk about today. And I love my job because I get to build things for people who build things, just like all of you. So let's get started.
Awesome. So just a quick show of hands. Who has used the technical preview of Copilot Workspace so far? A few hands. OK, maybe we can change that. And who's seen a live demo? Good. You've all been paying attention in the keynote. I love it. And who maybe hasn't seen anything yet or hasn't used Copilot Workspace or seen it? A few hands. OK, good. So what we're going to do in this session is, this is really a rare opportunity to get behind the scenes, have that sneak peek behind the curtain of Copilot Workspace, but in particular GitHub Next and how they've been building things, and kind of dispelling the myth that actually the way we build software isn't too dissimilar to anyone else, and kind of making that real for you all. So there are three things that we want you to take away from here today. The first is how GitHub Next built Copilot Workspace, and seeing that early prototyping, the iteration of the project, that it is really, really similar. When you think about those mock-ups that you build, we do the exact same thing. Second, then, we'll go through a demo of Copilot Workspace, teach you some tips and tricks, help you with some concepts as well, so you can take that back to your own day-to-day, to your own teams, and really get the most out of Copilot Workspace. And then from there, finally, Cole will share several learnings and practices that has frankly made the technical preview so successful, because we have this thriving community that just love Copilot Workspace, and there's a lot of things that we've learned along the way. So, sound good?
Yeah, sounds great, Chris.
Good, love it. We're going to keep interacting, so just going to warn you here. So, before we jump in, let's set some context. A year in AI is a long time, right? When you think back to 2021, 3 years ago, that's when we released the technical preview of GitHub Copilot. Fast forward 3 years, there's been many ships, many kind of iterations and incremental features added. And since then, we've been continuing to innovate in the AI space. And at the center of all of that is how we make that experience better for all of you, for day-to-day developers, but also for businesses to solve problems. So why am I telling you this? Well, the team that built GitHub Copilot and prototyped it initially is GitHub Next. It's this team. The team that built GitHub Spark and showed that yesterday, the team that talked about Learning Sandbox earlier, the team behind Copilot Workspace. So they have built up a wealth of experience over the years and experimenting with these AI technologies. They're at the forefront of this, so I'm going to hand over to Cole to tell us a bit more.
Sweet.
Cole.
Thank you for the intro, Chris. So for those who don't know, GitHub Next is a small team of about 20 researchers and engineers, and our job is pretty cool. Our job is to spend our days investigating the future of software development. What this means is we build a lot of prototypes. They often start small. We do a lot of internal dogfooding, which means we try the prototypes out ourselves to determine whether or not we should pursue them. We then take our most promising ideas and we ship them as technical previews so we can learn from all of you. And then once we've validated our ideas in technical preview, we hand it over to our amazing engineering and product teams to build them at production scale. Now, one of the questions that we've been interested in for the last few years now is how can we use AI to reduce the complexity of building software, which in practice often means how can we make it easier for you to go from task to code. Now, when you're approaching a problem as big as reducing the complexity of building software, it's helpful to have a few guiding principles. And here are a few principles at Next that we think make for delightful developer experiences. So if you're building AI tools too, these might be helpful for you. The first is to reduce activation energy. We want to make getting started as easy as possible. Our hypothesis is that if we reduce the complexity of the task, we also reduce the activation energy needed to get started on that task. In other words, if you make the task easier, you're also making it easier to get started. Next, make forward progress obvious. Our tools need to be intuitive for users to use and guide them towards success. AI has introduced a lot of new capabilities for software, but users can't take advantage of those capabilities if they have no idea how to use your software. So make your software easy to use. The next is to allow developers to steer. We know that AI is a tool for developers. It's not a replacement for developers. So it's important to keep developers in the loop and make sure that they always feel like they're in control. And last, make AI output easy to verify. We think that AI output is most helpful when you can be confident in the answers and the code that it generates. So when you're building AI tools, you need to provide the right information and tooling to verify that AI output. So to quickly recap, when we're building AI tools, we want to make them approachable, intuitive, steerable, and verifiable. So with these principles in mind, let's revisit that big question of how we can reduce complexity in building software. Back in the summer of 2023, following the launch of Copilot X, the GitHub Next team started what we called an exploration season. Basically, this means that we didn't have any big ongoing projects, so for a couple of months, everyone on the team got to spend all of their time exploring whatever ideas they wanted to. And one of the explorations that came out of our exploration season was called speckling. Speckling is a natural language compiler, which means you can write your entire program in a natural language spec and use speckling to compile it into a running app. So for example, here's a natural language spec that you might write for a note-taking app. Notice here that we're only describing how we want the app to work, not how to implement it. We really like this experience of writing code or writing apps with natural language, but the non-deterministic nature of large language models made for an unstable compiler, meaning that you could have the same natural language spec, compile it, and you might get different outputs. This led us to a new idea called extract, edit, apply, or EEA for short. With EEA, you can extract a natural language spec from an existing code base about any topic you want. So for example, if we wanted to change the authentication system for an app, we might extract a spec about authentication. Next, we can edit that natural language spec to change how our authentication system works. So if we wanted to introduce sign in with GitHub, we could just write, our app now supports sign in with GitHub, and then we can use AI to apply those edits back onto code. Hence the name extract, edit, apply. This is a screenshot of the first ever UI that Don Syme, one of our researchers, put together for EEA. And this is the seed for what would eventually grow into Copilot Workspace. And I included the screenshot here because I think we all know that our favorite products start out looking like this, but we don't get to see these initial screenshots. So if you're working on a new project right now, don't forget to take screenshots because you might be given a talk like this and they'll be helpful. So fast forward to April 2024, when we released the technical preview of Copilot Workspace, you can see that our initial EEA prototype has evolved quite a bit. Since the initial prototype, we changed the name. We actually did that a few times. So if you come see me afterwards, I'll tell you all the names. We updated the design language to match the rest of GitHub. My previous role at GitHub was actually on the Primer team, which is our design systems team. So obviously, the first thing I did when I joined the team was rebuild Workspace using our Primer design system components. We integrated a terminal. We built a VS Code extension, so it makes it easy for you to verify the code that you generate with Copilot Workspace. And then we did a lot of user studies to learn how people use Copilot Workspace and how we can make it better. And we also dog-fooded a lot, which means that we use Copilot Workspace to build Copilot Workspace. But perhaps the biggest evolution from EEA to Copilot Workspace is that we revisited this idea of task to code. This is fundamentally how developers work, so we designed Copilot Workspace around this workflow. But task to code really isn't the full picture. When you're working on a task, first you usually have to do some planning. You use your knowledge of the existing code base, and you understand what your desired state is and how you want to get there. And then when you get to code, I don't know about you, but I don't write perfect code on the first try, so you often have to iterate to get to the solution that you're happy with. So this is a more complete picture. And if we back up, we can see the evolution from spec-laying to extract, edit, apply, and then eventually to the task-to-code workflow that we currently have in Copilot Workspace. So to give you a demo of this workflow in action, I'm going to have Chris hand it over to Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Cole. So if we just switch over to the demo machine, please. Awesome. Thank you. So one of the other projects that GitHub Next work on is something called Monospace. So it's a set of fonts that you can use in your terminal. And you can see we've got a few here. We've got Neon, Argon, Xenon, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see that that's kind of updating in this code viewer that we've got on the site here. We can switch between the different tabs. This looks good. I can change the font size. But, Cole, I notice we're missing something.
Ooh, what are we missing?
We're missing Rust.
Ooh.
Rust is kind of hot right now, so we should probably go and add it. So let's jump across to an issue that I created earlier. So this is live. This is real. So this is the real production site that we're going to be making changes to, so no pressure. And this is the real repo that the GitHub Next team use as well. So you can see we've got this GitHub issue created. We've got our title of Add Rust example to the font playground. And we've been pretty clear in terms of what that acceptance criteria is. So as Cole mentioned, that getting state from A to B and what the expectation is to get there, just think of it the way you would communicate with any other developer. You need to be clear on your intent, what it is you're aiming to achieve. Otherwise, you're not probably going to get there. So the clearer you can be, the better. So you'll notice over here that we have this Open in Workspace button. So we'll go ahead and click that. And this gets us into that flow of working with Workspace. So on the left, we can still see that issue. And on the right, we've got this kind of brainstorming tab. And there's a couple of flows. So for anyone that has been using Workspace for a while, you might be familiar with the idea of a spec. And this looks very similar to a spec. That idea of my current state, what does the repository currently do? What does the code currently do? And what is the desired state? So where do I want to be when we've made those changes? But we've also got this new brainstorming kind of mode where you can be a bit more exploratory in what you're looking to achieve. And you might not have your set goal yet. You're trying to figure out what that is. So there's different modes of choosing your own adventure here. And we'll cover those a bit later. But for now, I can see that yeah, it's evaluating what the current state of the repo is. So no, there's no Rust sample. This is the file that contains all the different samples, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can see in here, yep, the end goal is let's have that Rust sample. Let's go and put it in that file. We should probably have this package imported as well, et cetera. So it's very clear in terms of what that end goal is going to be. So what I can do now is I can step to the next stage of this process, which is the plan. So think about this brainstorming stage as just bringing together what our intent is and just a bit of additional context for Copilot Workspace to generate that plan of action. And I like to think of the plan as a little bit like a recipe. So if you think about it, what are the steps that Chris would take or Cole would take to go and implement that change? So we would go and open that code sample file. We'd add a Rust code sample to the code samples array. We'd go and add that Rust languages object. And then we'd probably need to go and install that package as well. Those are the steps that we would follow. So it makes it very easy in terms of that verifiability and kind of understanding, has the AI done what I wanted it to do? It's able to act as a little bit of a checklist there. So again, we can just go ahead and click the green button for implementing our selected files. And here we go, we've got our sample. So you can see that we've got Rust here in this code sample here. And then we've also got this import of the code mirror lang Rust. And I believe we got some additional imports there. Great. So there's one more thing that we need to do, because, of course, we've brought in a new package. It's not in our repository yet. And what we can do with Copilot Workspace is we can run these commands right from here within this plan section. So if I go and click on that execute all, what that will do is that will run that plan for us. So behind the scenes, what is happening is you'll see here that we've got this creating code space happening. So behind the scenes with all of these, you've got this, oh, there we go, let's reconnect. We've got this compute under the covers, which is effectively powering things that you can do in the terminal, for example. So you could go and run that app environment, you could go and build, test, and run, etc. as well. And that is how you can go and do that. Here's the code that we had. And as I mentioned, you can go and make these changes. You can go and execute that command there. I'm going to step over here just so I can see the video a bit easier. So you can see here we're installing this package, and then great, that package is run and successfully worked there. And then what we can do is we can open the terminal just like we're used to in our local environment. So npm run dev is what we'll do for this site. And then what we get is we get our static site loaded in terms of running on the code space. So if you think about it, if you've used code spaces before, it's that on-demand developer environment that we can spin up. Everything's there configured that we want to have. So we can just go ahead, click this button, and then we get forwarded to that port. So there's this nice integration between workspace and between code space, and you've nicely and easily got access to that app environment. So you can see there now we've got the Rust tab. So that was now successfully added. And then that allows us then to start experimenting and checking that everything is working as expected. So at this point then, we could go ahead and we could go and make some other changes in Copilot Workspace as well. For example, we could say something like in the comments, hello world, hello universe in that code sample. So what that then, the point that I'm trying to get across here is that that code that you're seeing in that environment syncs across to the live preview that you then get as well. So it allows you to have that kind of quick iterative loop of being able to try changes, test them, check them, and then kind of that inner loop that we're used to with development locally. So then from there, it's not just the within the editor that you've got there or within the Copilot Workspace user interface. You can even spin up something like a code space so that then you can go and use things like your extensions, you can use your step-through debugging, and those maybe more advanced tools that you might want to use that maybe aren't just in the user interface. So if we change the comment to hello universe, what you'll notice is the code space, the Copilot Workspace, and that app preview are all in sync together as well. So it gives you this kind of harmonious way of working with all of these different environments. So with that, Cole, I'll hand back to yourself.
Okay, thanks for that demo, Chris. So I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into all of the steps that Chris just walked us through. As you saw, we can open a GitHub issue in Copilot Workspace. And GitHub issues are a great entry point into Copilot Workspace because they often contain helpful details like acceptance criteria and links to documentation. But they're not the only entry point into Copilot Workspace. You can also open pull requests in Copilot Workspace to continue iterating on your existing changes. You can even open ad hoc tasks without ever opening an issue by just going to a repository homepage and clicking on that code button. And then you'll see a tab that says Copilot, and you can type your task directly in there. You can even open template repos inside of Copilot Workspace and bootstrap new repositories entirely with natural language. All of these entry points are deeply integrated into github.com, but you can also open Copilot Workspace from anywhere using query params. So as you can see, you can go to copilot-workspace.githubnext.com. You specify the repository you want to open, and then you can enter the task description in that query param. And I actually built a raycast extension to kind of show off the capability of this query param. And it allows you to select text in any open application. You open raycast, and then you can use that text to start a new task with just a few keystrokes. I think this is just scratching the surface of the integration possibilities with Copilot Workspace, and I'm excited to see what you all will do with this. So if you're looking for a side project, feel free to explore and share it with us. So no matter where your task description starts, whether it's an issue or it's from the raycast extension, the more context that you give Copilot Workspace, the better your results are going to be. So this is an example of a good issue with a lot of context. You can see we have acceptance criteria, we've mentioned names of files and packages, and it's well scoped, meaning it's not a huge project. Here's another example of a good issue that we can open up in Copilot Workspace. And we can see that all of the details that we provide in the issue description help Copilot Workspace pick the most relevant files. Here's the list of the files that it referenced there. And we even mentioned URLs, and you can see that Copilot Workspace can crawl URLs and use that as context when generating code. You can see here that it's retrieving the content from those URLs. So once you have entered your task, we now move on to what we call brainstorming. And like Chris mentioned, brainstorming is an evolution on what we used to call the spec. You can basically think of it like filling in the details that you left out of your task description. It does this by understanding the current behavior of your repository and summarizing the desired state based on your task description. But brainstorming isn't just about expanding on your task description. If you open brainstorming without entering a task description, it'll suggest questions for you to ask to get you started. You can see here it's giving us an overview. You can even ask your own questions. So we might ask, how do you update, or how do you add Ruby to the playground? And you can see that the suggested questions update as we kind of evolve our task. And we can add any answers to our task as context. Now, once we have a task description that we're happy with, maybe we've used brainstorming, we can move on to planning. And like Chris mentioned, planning is like a recipe. It tells you which files you need to change, maybe delete, and it even includes terminal commands to run. You can edit any line of the plan, and once you're happy with it, you can move on to code. And I'm going to pass it over to Chris to talk a little bit about that.
Awesome, thanks, Cole. So, yep, you've made your plan. And at this point then, we're in that environment that we know and love as developers. We're into writing code. It's so familiar, and that's our kind of happy place. And when we think about code in Copilot Workspace, it's not just using natural language to go and make those changes. You can go and make those manual edits as well if you want. You've got access to the terminal. You can go and build, test, and run, for example. And you've got this kind of full toolbox with GitHub Codespaces as well. So as an example, here's that app that we were just looking at, the Monospace site. And what you can do with those different files is you can click that little target button, and that allows you to kind of focus the prompt of what you're working with Copilot Workspace on that specific file. So you can see there that we were, I think, sorting the different tabs in alphabetical order there. So we go and implement that file, and then once that comes back to us, we get that diff again coming back, and then we can go back, switch across to the Monospace site, and then there you go, you can see that all of our tabs are now in alphabetical order. Great. But you're not just limited to natural language. You can do the same things in code as well. Now, if you've got access to GitHub Copilot, within Copilot Workspace, you can even use the Copilot extension as well, so because of that power of code spaces behind the scenes. So you can see there, we just typed in that comment into that editor, and then we get that, that response back from GitHub Copilot. And again, we've got that list sorted there. Now, let's do something else. Let's go and edit our existing code and just remove all of the tabs in there. I'm not going to get into a tabs and spaces debate here, folks, okay? Let's just get rid of it all and just, no, I'm just joking. But let's get rid of that. And the reason I want to do that is I want to show just an example of using the natural language to go and run some of these commands. So what I asked for was go and lint or use Prettier to go and make these specific files in the diff look better. I wouldn't know what that command is off the top of my head. Like, I could do it for the full directory, but for those specific files, I wouldn't know. And Copilot Workspace was able to help me do that just with that power of natural language. And now as we go ahead and switch back to away from the terminal, we can go to the outputs. And you have this idea of build, test, and run. And these are some common stages that we're used to as developers when we're writing our code and building our apps. So you'll notice when we were going through that, you can click that little light bulb icon, and it suggests, based on the context of that repository, what is most likely going to be that step that you want to go and do there. It's just a little bit of like that paper cut in terms of that developer experience. So good, we've got through that code stage, we've written our first set, and just like Cole, I definitely do not write perfect code first time, nowhere near. And I'll need to keep iterating and iterating. And it's no different with Copilot Workspace. So if we jump in again, I think one of my favorite features with Copilot Workspace is the ability to go between different states. So here, I'm just steering Copilot Workspace a little bit. I'm adjusting my plan. As Cole mentioned earlier, steerability is important, and we've got that throughout. So in terms of that brainstorming stage, in terms of the plan, and in terms of the code as well. So for this example, we're just going to make the tabs go from kind of a dark red to maybe a lighter white kind of color. But I'm kind of deciding, hey, do I want to go from dark to light, or do I want it to go from light to dark? And just with the power of natural language, I'm able to kind of start experimenting with that. So I can say, right, let's just reverse the direction there. And there we go, that looks okay. I'm not the designer, Cole is the designer. But then you can see that in the top of Copilot Workspace, we have this undo and this redo button. And why I love this specific feature so much is that it allows us to start experimenting. I can just come up with that idea, use the power of natural language, and start saying, right, maybe let's try this thing. That didn't quite work out. Let's go back and try that thing. And you can keep bouncing between these different ideas. So that's the idea of being able to iterate in terms of Copilot Workspace. And then, at that point, it's the process that we know and love. With Copilot Workspace, we can click a button that says Create Pull Request, and it generates the pull request description. We can link it back to our issue, and then we can put a sharing URL into that as well. So at this point, Cole, I think I'm going to hand back to you to summarize the tips and tricks for us.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So if you've been paying very close attention, you might have noticed that we've been sprinkling in some tips and tricks throughout this talk. But if you haven't been paying attention, that's okay. We compiled a list of our favorite tips and tricks into a blog post, and you can scan this QR code to check that out. But really quick, I just want to recap some of our favorites. The first is to decompose tasks. This is good advice in general when programming, but especially when you're using AI tools like Copilot Workspace, it's helpful to break down big projects into smaller tasks. Next, remember to be specific and provide context. The more context that you give Copilot Workspace, the better. But if you don't know all the context, initially, that's okay too. You can use brainstorming to help define your task. Next, remember to iteratively review and refine. Copilot Workspace is not a one-shot tool. It's designed to help you iterate, so don't forget to use those natural language revision features. And lastly, use the inner loop. Like Chris mentioned, you can build, test, and run your code entirely inside of Copilot Workspace, which makes for a very streamlined workflow. And there's actually a fifth tip, but you'll have to check out the blog post to find out what it is. Okay, so far we've talked about how Copilot Workspace works and why we built it. And now I want to share a few insights that we've gained along the way. Hopefully you'll take back some of these insights and they'll be helpful for you on the projects that you're working on right now. On the GitHub Next team, we really value user feedback. And we've made a number of changes to Copilot Workspace based on user feedback we've gotten from our technical preview. Most of these improvements fall into two general themes. The first is simplifying the feedback loop and creating a thought partner. To simplify the feedback loop, we elevated natural language. You can see this natural language glowing revision bar. This is now the main way to iterate inside of Copilot Workspace. We also made it easy to see the diff with just the last iteration. So you can choose between viewing the latest changes, any uncommitted changes, or all of your changes. To make Copilot Workspace a better thought partner and allow you to complete tasks even if you don't have all of the words to describe them, we built brainstorming. This allows Copilot Workspace to suggest questions and ideas, and it allows you to ask Copilot Workspace your own questions. And these are just a few of the highlights. If you want to see the full list of changes we've made to the technical previews, you can check out the changelog here. And I'll leave this up for one more second, because it's definitely worth checking out the changelog. JC writes them every week, and they're very well done.
And there's actually been some really great ships over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, last 2 weeks, we've done a lot of work, which is fun for putting this talk together. OK, so aside from the product changes we've made, we've also learned about just how to run a technical preview. And I want to share a few of those insights. The first is to connect directly with your community. We have a central Discord channel for all of our technical previews where they can share feedback and ask questions. And we do our best to check regularly and respond to questions and address feedback. And the responses we've got in Discord has actually had a direct impact on the direction of Copilot Workspace. So if you haven't already, join our Discord. We'll have a link to that later in the slides. We also love to see our community members write blog posts, sharing their experience using Copilot Workspace. The next thing we learned is the importance of clearly communicating changes. As I mentioned, we ship weekly, and we publish a changelog documenting the user impact of all of our updates. This is a great way to generate excitement and build momentum around the project. And it also keeps us honest and makes sure that we're delivering actual user impact every week. And lastly, dog food your app. Make sure that you're actually using the thing that you build. This is a great way to understand the experience of your users, and hopefully you'll catch bugs before they do. JC, our head of Next, is a huge advocate for dog fooding, and we actually call him our chief dog fooding officer. Because he's always dog fooding our projects and sharing his experiences in Slack, just like you can see in this screenshot. So with that, I'll hand it to Chris to give us our key takeaways.
Super. Thank you, Cole. So let's quickly recap what we've covered today. Copilot Workspace has been built with this intentional set of design principles in mind. So reducing activation energy, making forward progress obvious, allowing the user to steer, and then making the AI outputs easy to verify. And while the user interface has significantly changed from the days of spec-lang and extract, edit, apply, those principles of the core user experience have remained throughout all of that. So the point I'm getting at is they've kept iterating, they've kept changing things, and that's OK. Things change over time, and that's important. But those principles have remained consistent and remained solid throughout. So also, what actually is Copilot Workspace? Well, it's the AI-native development environment to help you with those everyday tasks. And that is the real key part. We're now thinking of the problems that we're trying to solve, rather than thinking of the lines of code that we need to go and implement. Just a few months back, I was on train from going to London, and I was on my phone making some changes to my personal blog. And rather than thinking of the lines of code and the accessibility changes I wanted to make, I was just iterating with Copilot Workspace on, hey, can we fix all these ARIA labels? Can we do this? Can we do this? And able to feed in prompts to go and solve that and work with it collaboratively. So it goes then through this flow of starting off with that task, so that issue, or even something like the query params, for example, as well. Going into the plan, so having that kind of recipe of what you want to go and follow, into the code where you can iterate manually, you can iterate using natural language, and then ultimately raising that pull request then. And then there's that special source, and it really has been the community. You know, the community has been at the heart of everything that GitHub Next have been doing here with Copilot Workspace. You know, the team are daily on the Discord community interacting, and it's just a joy to kind of see how people are using it, maybe some of the friction points, and the team just jumping in and solving those as well. So I deeply, deeply encourage you to get involved there. But ultimately, you know, JC, Chief Dog Fooding Officer, using your own tools to build your own tools and making sure you avoid those edge cases that might come up for your users is so important as part of that development process, and thinking from their perspective, even down to the detail of a changelog, rather than saying, hey, we've shipped vision capabilities in Copilot Workspace, which is one of the things that came out last week, which is awesome. It's, hey, we've shipped vision capabilities, so now you could go and put in an architecture diagram, or you could put a user interface and use Copilot Workspace to help you do that. So it's thinking in your user's perspective rather than your perspective as a product team shipping. So this is the money slide. We'll keep this on for a moment. I'm sure there's many QR codes that people want to go and scan here, so I'll leave this on for a moment. The URLs are underneath as well. First off, we've really only touch the tip of the iceberg here with this session. So to explore further, first off, if you want to get onto the waitlist, please go to gh.io/cw-signup and make sure you've signed up to the waitlist. If you are a Copilot Workspace user already, or maybe you're not and you just want to get involved in the community, that's the URL to the Discord channel. Please come along and be a part of the community. We'd love to have you there. And then if you want to take away those tips and tricks, that's the QR code there as well for some tangible examples. So we want to hear from you. Please give us your feedback, whether it's positive, negative. We always want to make sure that we can continue improving this. And more importantly, we want to do more cool sessions like this where we can peek behind the curtain and see what teams like GitHub Next, who are at the forefront in the industry of what they're doing, showing you how they work and what's going on behind the scenes. So that feedback helps us get sessions like this in future Universe sessions and future conferences as well. So with that, we've been Chris and Cole. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you at the GitHub Next booth.
Yeah.